Hello everyone, and welcome to the Rio video for 2023. I don't make a lot of LEGO videos anymore, but I do want to deliver at least one yearly hangout where we talk about the LEGO related things that we've been up to. This time we're talking LEGO conventions. We participated in 2 of them this year. Then photography. We'll go through our photography journey and take a look at some of our first LEGO pictures compared to today. And finally, I'll briefly talk about future plans, because I have decided what to do with this channel now. Let's dive into it. This year we attended 2 LEGO exhibitions. For the first and smaller one, we transformed the Dragon's Lair to a classic space landscape. And we finished the updated Minecraft world, which I recently shared in a separate video. And there were also some additional Minecraft builds that I fixed up. Not a lot of visitors attended, but it was nice being in the company of fellow local master builders. And it was a good warm-up for the bigger convention, which was a month away. So we had 33 days to polish up these builds and make some new ones, and I have data on this. In October, I recorded almost 80 hours of creative activity, and in November, just over 100, and most of this is building LEGO. We built new mosaics, a Geometry Dash build, and a Five Nights at Freddy's build. Some older creations also had their premiere for the public, mainly this Clash Royale arena. I don't think most of these mocks will be displayed again. We like to do something new for every exhibition. That's an integral part of exhibiting LEGO to us, and it's really half of the fun to create a long list of things you want to build, scrap half of the ideas because it's unrealistic, then hammer on some projects during late nights and get it done just in time, and have all that work pay off when you see all the excited kids react to your LEGO. And when I say we, I mean I and my 2 brothers. They aren't as much into LEGO as I am, and I'm responsible for pulling this off, but it wouldn't be this good and not nearly as fun without them. And it's just great having an organized force of builders here in the basement studio bricking away. And we were awarded for our display, Exhibitor of the Year in our town, which was the icing on the cake. So that was yet another well-executed event by Klossfestivalen. And we surely improved our routines and our builds from last year's attempt, which wasn't bad by any means, but our participation this year was more focused and calculated. I'm looking forward to next year's exhibition, or exhibitions, we'll see. And I only vaguely know what project I'll select among all the ideas I want to build. So it's really exciting. But now, let's head to the office. I believe we have some photos to look at. Okay, let's talk photography. Patents Pandas has increasingly become focused on photos rather than videos. I remember when I was really into making videos, and I had the inclination to dedicate the time to do so. Now my philosophy is that the LEGO should clearly be the star of the show. And there is a place for long videos, there is a place for short videos, and there is a place for photos in order to document the builds. And I've now defaulted to photos because it's honestly quick and easy. But that's not to say that it's just point and shoot. A good photo requires some thought behind it. It requires some photography skills, and it requires some decent gear. So let's go back to a time where I had none of those. We'll react to some of my old photos, starting from a single one from 2016. So this is a pretty basic photo. The camera quality and the lighting is perhaps expectedly not too great. One easy change that you could do in this photo that doesn't require any gear would be to center it a bit more. It's leaning towards the left here for no creative reason really. It's just that I didn't know how to properly frame a shot back in the days. So it's not too shabby. I've seen that we have some worse pictures here, so let's jump to 2017. So this was the first time I did a LEGO photo outside, and I know that this isn't the final image that I settle with. This is. And it's not good. I much prefer this unedited version. And perhaps this is just me, or maybe you can relate, but when you discover photography and photo editing, it's so cool that you can manipulate the images and make your own edits to it. And there are sliders and dials that are fun to mess around with. And perhaps you can drag up the contrast, the saturation, and the sharpness of the photo. And then you end up with something like this. This is over-sharpened, over-saturated, cropped in as well. And I didn't understand the concept of resolution back then, that you zoom in on the pixels. And I don't think it's a good crop. I don't know why I cropped the bottom. The composition of this is off. Okay, so continuing the theme of not understanding how pixel resolution work, this is a screenshot of a video that I exported from my phone. It might even be a screenshot from the YouTube video, which is even worse because then there's more compression involved. I believe this app that I used, it's in the file name, it's called Afterfocus, which allows you to blur selected parts of the image. I think that app decreased the resolution as well, so we've ended up with a pretty low resolution image. As a YouTube thumbnail, it kind of works when it comes to the technical aspects of it. But then you get to the creative aspects, and the figure makes up a very small portion of the image. This is a thumbnail that, and it's called a thumbnail because, well, it's quite small, so you should be able to see what's going on in this small photo. And I don't think you get that experience when the figure is 10% of the image at best. Okay, and then we get to some more screenshots. I know these are screenshots because it's in the file name, and they are screenshots of the YouTube video again. So we're starting off bad with the technical quality of the photo. I also like how, or I don't like, how I added this artificial blur. This is clearly not natural blur from the camera, and it's very aggressive as well. And what's funny with this image in particular is that what should be in focus isn't really sharp either. So this is just straight up bad in so many ways. Okay, do we have some better ones here? No, this... I guess I was serious with this edit though. I don't think this is a joke. I think I added more grain to this photo. Did I really need to add more grain? I mean, sometimes you can add grain and make perhaps a black and white edit to make up for an error in the photo. Perhaps it's not very high quality, and then you can make some creative edit to make it look more intentional. I still do that sometimes if the lighting conditions or something is very harsh to work with and the image doesn't turn out very well. Okay, and that's 2017, so let's see what 2018 has to offer. Okay, so I remember taking this photo. I think this is the first planned Lego photo that I did. I approximately had in mind what I wanted to do. I went through some iterations. It looks like this, the final shot. I think I prefer this shot where the blue in the lightsaber is more pronounced. Yeah, this might be my first good Lego photo. I quite like the composition actually. You see the "Let the past die" text. I believe I had another version of that I didn't quite settle with. It didn't quite fit the slopeness of this mountain here. And this looks more like the Star Wars opening crawl with the angled yellow text in space. You know what I'm talking about. You see Kylo Ren's former self presented with the mask here, which he's left behind, and he's walked away from it, walked upwards, and this part is more clouded in darkness. That's an intentional effect. I added some vignetting there, and he's looking into a bright light source, probably a sun. Yeah, so this is more than acceptable. And same with this photo, I don't see anything obviously wrong with it. If I did it today, some things would have been better. Obviously the technical aspects would be better, but composition-wise, I quite like it. He looks kind of trapped here, like he's going down a bad path, the dark side, because there isn't much breathing space here. He's kind of cornered in the top right corner. I also appreciate how I captured as many effects as possible on my own. So this lightsaber effect is actually part of an image that I took, an image of cars moving in very fast speed. And I thought that would look good as a lightsaber effect. The edits on this isn't very good. I think I did fine on editing on mobile for a long time. Yeah, today it would have looked much better, but I'm not going to be too harsh on this photo. This photo isn't as good, I think. It should be more like this, perhaps. And Kylo Ren isn't really in focus. And to be fair, I don't think I used this one. I think I could tell even back then that this photo wasn't as good as the previous two. And I didn't edit the lightsaber effect as well. It was probably too difficult because some of it was blurred out. I don't think I knew how to blur the car light effect. And then obviously this is just over edited. Okay, so aside from the framing of the shot, which should perhaps be more like this, more centered, I think this is a nice photo. I like the practical effects of it. This was out in the snow. It looks like a cave, I would say. Yeah, aside from not being too movie accurate, I quite like it. This shot, however, I would have done differently. The framing of shots have psychological effects, and if you look at this photo, it almost looks like the Wampa is overpowering Luke, which is not what happens in the movie. So I would definitely rotate this image to visually express the power dynamics between these characters. I don't know what's going on here. The photo itself is reasonably crisp. I see that I added some artificial blur and it's more subtle this time. I don't know what the story behind this photo is. I guess it's something like, what about the porg attack on Kiadimundi? One thing I will point out is that I believe this is around the time where I discovered frames. You can see that I've added 2 frames, one black frame and then one white rounded frame to get those rounded corners. And I don't like that. I don't like the frames. Yeah, especially when I add frames that are obviously from a certain editing program. So I think that just decreases the quality of the photo when you know how something was made, and if there is a default effect in some photo editing software that you can spot. I just don't like that. At least this one looks decent because the colors are very similar to the main subject in this photo. So I can somewhat get by this, but then of course we have this white frame as well. I guess the point is that if you see it on a feed and you use white background, the photo will appear with rounded corners, and I guess it's somewhat cool, but I just don't like it. At least I should export the original image, which to be fair I actually did this time. I like how simple the image is. It's quite focused. You can see that I also added some digital blur here, which doesn't look good. You can see the amount of grain here, and then it's just washed out. I like the surroundings of this image. I, for some reason, got a Lord of the Rings feeling with the leather here. And that's what I try to keep in mind when I photograph Lego photos nowadays, that the environments should support the subject and not just be there. There should be an intention behind it. And then the text here. Again, I should have exported a version without the text because it's not that fun. When you add the text to an image, there should really be some contrast between it and the background, which you can see here with this word, but not as clearly with this word because the background is also bright and white there. Then we have a photo that's bad in every way. I believe this is the final version of the photo because this version has a white line here. But obviously this photo also has a line above here. Maybe I missed that. Aside from the build, which is a first order take on an old classic space set, I don't like anything about what I'm seeing here. So I just took the background from the web. I don't actually know if I'm allowed to use that, but that move went against my, even at that time, established rule of trying to make everything myself. And I don't know why I picked that image because it's not like it's high quality. And it's probably a screenshot as well. I probably didn't download it because I still didn't understand this resolution part. And the fact that I didn't understand the concept of resolution is very obvious when you take a look at what I did here. I used an eraser software on some of these photos that erased the background. And I think that edit, the removal of the background in this particular photo, might look okay. I don't know because the resolution is so bad that I can barely make out what's going on here. But what this eraser software did was decrease the resolution of the photo. So I ended up with compressed photos once I had done that edit, and well, in this photo it clearly shows. I actually remember this photo, and this isn't the edited version. I couldn't find that one. I think I did adjust the composition of it, but aside from it not just being too interesting with a piece of separator in the snow and the background isn't very intentional, it's just there, I believe it looks visually okay. I kind of like the sun here. It was good at the time being, and I could understand why, but I probably wouldn't have snapped this photo today. And then this photo, there's just so much going on. That's because my studio was too small to record this at the time being quite large build. I couldn't really fit it on my desk properly, so I decided to build a set with these sorting jar units. And some of this artwork pointing out things in the build, but there's just so much going on. So I don't think it looks that good, honestly. Okay, this photo is more focused on what it's trying to achieve. The building is the centerpiece, and the background is quite minimalistic, which I like. It's not trying to compete with the subject for attention, which you can see in some of my older photos. And I don't know why I did this edit here where I removed the colors. I guess it looks somewhat cool, but the edit is just not very well executed. And I quite like this photo as well. It's a decent top-down. There is some interesting visual at least. The picture is well lit, it's somewhat crisp. I like it. Unlike this photo, the composition is off. It should be more like this. Something like that, utilizing the rule of thirds. I can see the artificial blur. The colors doesn't look quite right. Some of the parts are just kind of soft. I added some glamour effect there. I don't like it. Same with these ones, they're just kind of mid. I think this is an example of using a creative edit in order to make up for a lack of quality in the shot. In this case, I think it was a lack of quality with the build. It wasn't a build I was necessarily proud of, but I figured that if I performed a crazy edit, perhaps you could overlook that and you could focus a bit on the image. And I can see why. I think I would have done something differently if I did it today. I probably wouldn't have uploaded the build in the first place. Which is at least something that I liked about being a young creator who didn't think much about quality, that I could focus so much on quantity. And I also had more time on my hands to dedicate to these kind of projects. So I would just build a lot and upload a lot. And I don't upload as often today, so that's something I kind of miss, but I wouldn't necessarily go back to it. Okay, and then we have this picture. You can see the edits that I made. Some of these edits are fine, some are just too much. There is so much going on in this image. Okay, and then I over-sharpened it as well. At least I got rid of the white corners I had in one of the iterations. The build takes up a lot of the space. It's quite dominant in the photo, and I like the composition of it. And again, this is another example of me using mostly my own effects. These are actually photos of tiles here. Again, I quite like, I like the composition of these, but sometimes there's too much going on, like what's happening here. And obviously the technical quality isn't just quite there, but I like the concept of it. I think it was a fine build. I think I presented it in a decent way. And then you can also see here that I actually used the same background in these photos. And I wouldn't have done that today. Not because most people would notice. I mean, I skipped over it just right now. But I think it does make that little quality difference, and those can be important. I took a lot of photos and videos outside this time around, and sometimes the background actually supports the subject. And we can somewhat see it here with the red pole here, this red rope here. And in other images it's not very obvious, or it isn't there. There's no intention with the background really, as in this image I believe. Which, by the way, the composition is a bit off. Okay, now we get to the porg. Okay, so this does a lot of the same errors. I believe it's a screenshot from probably the exported YouTube video. I still use this blur effect, which decreases the quality even more. But aside from that, I think it's well composed. It's very centered. It's quite symmetrical. And as a thumbnail, I think it works. And again, the picture is symmetrical. Your eyes naturally rest on the subject, which is also quite in focus and at least reasonably big. And of course, I then added these frames, which I know are from Snapseed. And again, I don't like that you can identify where the frames come from. This is from a video, the first green screen trick that I did. And the background is map painting, which I added. I appreciate the attempt. I think it might look better in video when the mantle is actually moving. I think this shot looked good in the video, but in this photo it's just so low quality. And I even did a slight white vignetting effect here, which is, it doesn't look very good at all. And then we got the frame again. There is an explanation for this photo being bad in every way. There is a feature that if you press on the head, the wings flap. And this is a video, I didn't want to show my hands while I performed the effect. The shot is just a few seconds of the camera panning and you see the effect, and it looks decent in video, I guess. And then we have some more photos of this abstract monochrome thing. Was my favorite among the bunch. And this was a time where I wanted to be very artistic and do some artistic things. Well, this is artistic, but it's not very good. Look at the contrast. Look at the graininess. The original photo probably looked decent though, because this is an interesting visual background, I believe. And then we have things like this. I just went way above with the vignetting effect and the contrast. And this photo from the same shoot looks half decent, the edit at least. And this just looks absolutely terrible, so I have no idea what I was doing. I was still quite ambivalent with the editing, I guess. And that's the first half of 2018. I'm sweating, it's warm in here. Okay, starting off stronger, I believe, at least. I think the vignetting is too strong in this image. I believe it's too soft. The subject is pretty centered. The effect looks half decent. I do see how this was made. There was a string here, and then I can see that I attempted to remove it because there is something fishy going on with the pieces up here. I believe this is a good example of how the surrounding visuals should support the subject. I don't think I had much space to work with here. I believe that the edges are just right here outside of the frame. But maybe I could have done a little bit better job with the composition. It's not quite centered and symmetrical. And again, aside from the frame here, which I again used, the background is interesting. This towel somewhat looks like water. Yeah, and the water behind this boat, steampunk boat, are 1x1 round transparent plates. This was a build done by Team Pandis, my brothers and my dad. I believe I took the photo. I know I edited it at least, because it's quite washed out, and then there's just something off with the colors if you look at this yellow and orange piece, for example. But it's somewhat interesting to build in a photo. Okay, this one was difficult to take photos of because it's a big build and there aren't very many interesting visuals surrounding it. Quite the opposite, there are things in the background that you don't want in the frame. So this was the best photo I did of this build, although this version is unedited, I believe. Yeah, okay, this was the edited one. It doesn't look much better. You can clearly see the transition between what's artificially blurred and what's not. Here you see that there are buildings and cars that you don't want in the frame. I tried solving that by, again, making some kind of digital blur here. But I believe that usually doesn't come off very good. And especially not in this photo. I don't even know if I got the focus right on this. I probably did, but this car in the background really looks as much in focus as the subject. Okay, so I like these shots. The environment is picked and crafted in a way that supports the subject. I remember doing a Jocko Willink on this one and waking up at like 4:30 to get this sunrise shot. I prefer the unedited version of this. I don't know what it is either. I just built something to photograph. I don't know if it was worth waking up this early for these particular photos, but for the memories, it was absolutely worth it. I still remember this morning. Aside from the grain and the blur, which just doesn't look good at all, and especially not in combination with each other. And I would have framed the shot in a similar way if I did this photo today. Again, it was at the time a pretty good photo, I believe. This one I would have framed differently though, because this is Agent 008. This panda clearly has some power and status, and you perhaps want to show that by making the shot a bit lower. So he's looking down at you and not the other way around. And we haven't talked that much about colors. That's partly because I'm still not very good at color grading. But you can see that this is overexposed. There's too much contrast here. The white areas are too bright and the dark areas are just too black. The concept here is that unlike your phone, you're supposed to see through it, see the world instead of a screen. What I did in some of these photos was that I actually showed worthy things to see in the world, like nature. I had a tree in one photo. So although I think this background looks aesthetically pleasing, the concept isn't quite there, because you're supposed to see the world through this phone, and in this photo you see some wooden planks instead. The composition might actually be getting better now. The editing is still off in like every other image. I think this is just too soft and too bright. I hope that I went with this image. Okay, so maybe this is just an experiment. Maybe it's a prank from my former self, because it's just too contrasty, too saturated, and I should have known this by now. And in these photos, for example, I believe that what's in the frame is interesting to a point where, although I'm not using the best camera and I'm not too knowledgeable about photography, editing, it still comes off as perfectly fine, because the composition is not way off, the editing is not way off, and of course what's in the frame is really carrying the perceived quality of the photo. I believe this is somewhat interesting. Here again I use this eraser software on my phone, which sure erases the background, but also makes the photo more pixelated than the original photo. And I think it clearly comes across here. Okay, I don't know what this is. I didn't know at the time what this was supposed to be. Well, I guess it was supposed to be an abstract modern art figure in Lego, and I believe I did a decent job at capturing it. The stark contrast here actually makes sense, I believe. It's a somewhat wallpaper-worthy photo still, is it? Although I much prefer the wallpaper I have now with this digitally rendered Lego backdrop that's also liquefied in Photoshop. Oh, now we get some good ones. Okay, so unlike some of the other outside backgrounds that I had in previous photos, this one is quite minimalistic. It also supports the subject, which is in gray, well, light bluish gray. And then this figure unleashes his creativity, represented with all these colors here, and that almost mirrors the background as well. And same with this one. I did artificially make this area, well, pitch black, and it makes sense in this photo because he's reaching through. I don't know what it is. I didn't know at the time either. Maybe you shouldn't overinterpret these things, but he's reaching through a portal of the unknown, and even he looks quite surprised about it. And again, we can see colors being unleashed here. The fact that I didn't give this guy much breathing room makes sense in this photo because the guy is puzzled. He is kind of cornered, and that shows in this photo. And the same here, the framing makes sense. This guy has a lot of breathing room, and this guy is moving forward from a dark place to a more light place. It almost looks like he's stumbling in the dark, or perhaps he's blended by the light. I would have preferred if this area was completely black, and perhaps there should be some light source here, but I think this gets the point across. I like all of these photos. And again, this is a kind of fun edit. I used a double exposure feature in Snapseed, where I imported two of the same images layered on top of each other, and then I used some kind of blend effect. And then I somewhat twisted the photo laying on top to get this swing effect, which I believe is intentionally more pronounced down here. Okay, so we got some goodies from 2019 as well. Some phone setups using my Lego wallpapers. Some of these I believe are better than others. I yet again used an app which decreases the original resolution of the image. I wouldn't have done that today, but this effect looks kind of nice. Now I believe we get some photos that I can't complain much about. If I did them today, they would have looked better with my improved equipment and my increased experience. But some of these photos looks kind of nice. This is an interesting shot, I believe. Okay, same with this one. Again, I can detect some things that I would have done differently today, and that would have just looked better with my routines and my equipment today, but it's completely fine. This shot I can see was shot with 2x zoom. This was when I had a dual camera phone which allowed 2x optical zoom. You can see that in the perspective here, it isn't as wide angled as my other shots. And that was one of the fun things when I got a camera. That just gave so much more flexibility as opposed to being stuck in this, I believe, around 24mm focal range. This is for a thumbnail, and I believe it looks good as a thumbnail. But I can see now when I'm not watching this in a thumbnail format, but on a 27-inch monitor, that these two tools on the side are easily edited in there. It's using the same stick, so I had to take 3 separate photos and add them in post. And the way I did it was, again, using a eraser tool, probably the same one, because I can see the decrease in resolution here, and also some of the shadows looks unnatural. And the text is also low resolution. Looks good as a thumbnail. Conceptually, I like the photo. Okay, and finally for 2019 we got this image. It's very clean, perhaps too clean even. I would perhaps like some stars in the background. And I like how the space landscape isn't using those classic space crater base plates. I remember making an Instagram poll on this, and this picture lost against this one. Perhaps people like this because it's more focused. This is another example of me only using my own material, really. This is a photo that I took that I pixelated. So if I did this today, I would have used the Mosaics tool in stud.io and make a Lego image as the background, which I did here. This is a rendered Lego map painting, and I think it blends pretty well. The cutout looks perfectly fine, and this was a planned shot. I knew that the colors would be warm, so it looks like I might have even used some warm light here to spill over the characters here. And this is a digital render against a background which I photographed. This is a fun fact, this is Mars actually, and this is the moon. I guess that's a fun thing when using your own material, that you can point out all these things and references that that nobody else will know. This was a fun shot. It's quite accurate to the actual scene. The digitally added smoke looks fine, although I would have liked to make the lightsaber effect more practical, to have some light from the saber spill onto the wall. And these photos were fun, using different backdrops. That's one of the things that I want to do in the studio eventually, is to have multiple backdrops ready that you can just insert into the photography scene and then capture shots like this. These were some sheet of papers that I used, so I was quite restricted with the backdrops, which was one of the fun things when shooting outside, because you're less limited then. And yeah, we see it here. We got a forest environment opening up 2021. This was the first time I did a lightsaber effect in Photoshop. I should have just erased some of the inconsistencies here, but aside from that, it looks somewhat dope. A piece of Beskar again in a supporting environment with some tools and some iron. Yeah, figure is solitude. It makes sense to have a dark background then. Perhaps I would have even framed it more creatively if I did it now, giving this guy less breathing room, as we talked about. And then again, we got some digitally rendered Lego, again some photos that I took. And here's another reference. This was actually shot through a Leica viewfinder for the Leica camera, so that was kind of fun. 2022 was a transition period really, because I started off capturing shots on my phone, like this one, and again the cutout doesn't look good, and the picture is quite grainy. We got some more photos from the phone here. I still shot everything in auto mode, which is not optimal. Then I started using a camera, this one actually. I still used auto mode, and some of the shots were quite fiddly to get because of that. I didn't understand the concept of shutter speed and the exposure triangle. But I was able to capture some shots that you couldn't quite get on the phone. You can see the depth of field here. It's all natural compared to, for example, this shot, which uses the portrait mode, and then you can add some blur effects. In this case it looks fine, but the portrait mode isn't really supposed to be used for Lego, and it's a digital effect. Then I got a more modern camera. I still shot in auto mode, which I believe shows in some of these photos. When I started understanding the concept of aperture, which I don't still understand to a degree where I can explain it articulately, but you can see the aperture blades here, and the more open it is, the more lights it lets in, and the more blurry the background will be, and the more separated it will be from the subject. When I found out about that, I thought it was pretty cool, because I couldn't quite achieve that blur effect on the phone. So I opened up the aperture blades all the time. I had a lens that could go all the way down to f1.4, which gives a very good blur. But the problem is that sometimes this blur shouldn't quite be there. For example here, I want to get a lot of things in the photo, so using f1.4 is not optimal. This one is in f2, and there's just a little bit of the photo that's actually in focus. I still did a lot of my photos in auto mode, so I don't know if these settings are intentional or not, but it's on the right path. If I did this photo today, I would have, well, firstly perhaps framed it a bit higher, and then I would have cranked down the f-stop to maybe 8 or 10. And because you increase the f-stop, because you probably want more of the scene in crisp focus, that will let in less light. And to compensate for that, you can crank down the shutter speed, which will let in more light. And then you probably have to put the camera on a tripod, so that is stabilized perhaps during the 1 second where you capture the information. You can't really pull off that handheld. And all that to avoid using the ISO, which can create some of the grain and make the image appear less sharp. Okay, finally we're at 2023. At this point I was still in auto mode, which is why I believe the settings are not very optimal. It looks like the ISO is quite high because there's a lot of grain in the photo. We can take a look. Yeah, the ISO is at 1000. That in and of itself isn't necessarily bad, but this is a controlled environment, so I could introduce more light. So what I would have done here is that I would have cranked down the ISO to 50 to 200, something within that range. That would make the image a lot darker, but in order to counter that, I would have cranked down the shutter speed and then put the camera on a tripod. Yeah, and the same goes for this photo, it's the same setting here. Now we get to this Dragon Mosaic, and we can actually compare it to last year's Dragon Mosaic. I don't know which build I prefer. This was intentionally done in a very similar setting. But I do know which photo I prefer. This newer photo is definitely sharper, even though, yes, I suspected it's not using the optimal settings really. And now, while we're comparing photos, we can just take a look at some Minecraft shots here. And what's funny is that these newer photos were captured very spontaneously. I maybe just took 5 to 10 seconds framing the shot. They are unedited as well, unlike these older photos which I picked and edited. And I didn't even take these 5 photos. These were done by my brother and they look good. I will say that a lot of the quality there is because of the equipment. I decided to invest in a dedicated macro lens, which I'll use a ton for LEGO because it allows me to get really close. I think I've done more trick photography this year than I've done before, and some of the effects looks better than others. I don't think the cutout is very impressive on this one, and you can see that I did use a brush tool here to add some artificial light. If I knew the angle on this digital backdrop beforehand, I would have been able to pose the figure more accurately, because this just it doesn't look very natural, and I did also attempt to add a shadow here, which I don't think looks that good. Perhaps I could have added a pink piece here as a reference when rendering this image. I did add some artificial lights here, which I think looks just fine, but the effect is different if you have light on set. You can see that here, for example, this is actual light spilling onto the lightsaber. Okay, my recent trick photography is a bit better, I would say. In order to achieve hovering shots, I still use some kind of stick, usually a Lego piece. You can actually see the reflection of the Lego piece here, so that's a bit of a miss. And then I remove it in Photoshop. But I usually don't use the retouch tool. What I do is that I take 2 images, one with the subject in focus, the subject that's hovering, and then I remove it, and with the same settings, the same framing, the same focus, the same auto white balance, if I remember to set that. And then when I layer them in Photoshop and then remove what's holding up this hovering subject, it will look like magic. Again, you have to be careful with the reflections and the shadows. Okay, so there's nothing to rave home about this photo necessarily, but that's what I like about it, that the default standard has really improved here. So it's simple, it's clean, it does the job of documenting the creation, which is what I do with these photos and videos really. I document what I build. Although this was captured with the macro lens, this isn't the Darth Vader minifigure, it's those key ring lights, and those figures are bigger than minifigures. I've now switched to manual mode for these shots. It's much more optimal. The ISO is controlled. The f-stop isn't all the way down just because I wanted to show some scenery here, so it's at f4. And the shutter speed is down to compensate, and it's on a tripod. Sometimes I make the same mistakes though. I don't think I should have set the focus very close, and I should definitely have closed down the aperture to capture more of the scene in focus. And I was experimenting with the shutter speed here because I was pouring Lego in the shot. So if you have a very high shutter speed, the picture will become pretty crisp, like this one. And if you have a lower shutter speed, the picture will appear blurred and in motion. I didn't know what was the best. I think I did a couple of versions. So you have to experiment a lot. It's quite encouraging seeing that what we can do quite casually now is superior to anything we could have pulled off in the past. Of course, as I said, what's being photographed is carrying a lot of the weight of whether it's a good photo or not. But as we learned, even a good subject can be ruined with a bad photo. So it's a relief having the baseline quality be quite decent, I would say. And then we get to the final shot I want to look at, and the latest one as well. I think this is easily the best Lego photo I've taken, and certainly one of my favorite photos. And it's not like I spent a huge amount of effort into the build and the photo. The build is incomplete, and the photo was done quite casually. I had a decent idea of how I wanted to capture this spinner, this blader on the car. So I went out in the snow, I set up this angle, I messed around with the settings a little. I knew I wanted to edit in some lights here later, so I had a light here just outside the frame, and it spills some light onto the creation. I think I could have higher the brightness a little, but maybe even those small details make a little bit of a difference, make it look more natural. You can see some of the lighting on snow here. I knew I wanted to add snow falling down later, but then on set I came up with the idea to pour some snow onto the build. It's not something new, I've done it with Lego before, and that should make the snow effect look a bit more natural. It wasn't snowing this day, and I couldn't plan the shot for another day, so I had to pour some snow there. And then I also had to add the snow, which I think is a decent effect. One thing I did to make the snow look more realistic was that I added 2 layers of this. one blurred and one not, the blurred on top. And then I erased some of the blurred layer, which makes some of the snow come off more crisp, as you can see here. And I think it adds a certain bit of depth to the creation. It's one of those small things, just like the light here, which may increase the overall perceived realism and quality of the photo. And I still missed to adjust the auto-white balance, so I'm still learning a lot. As you can see here in these other photos I took, the color isn't quite consistent. And as I said, I don't know much about color grading, so I want to learn more about that definitely. But as I said, it is really encouraging knowing that some of these shots I could have only dreamed of not too long ago. I've only really done photography for 1.5 years, I would say. And it is worth mentioning that although I'm cringing at and critiquing my old work, it's a sign of progression to see obvious flaws in what you've previously done. And I want us to stumble forward. I know that in the future I'll be able to look back at my current work, my photos and videos, and see how they've aged. Yeah, in next year's Rewind, we might actually replay some of my old videos. We'll see. Finally, what are my plans for Panis Panis? What am I doing? That's a good question to ask yourself sometimes. I had the impulsive aspiration to create a lot of content this year, but I kinda had a change of heart. While I can say that I don't regret a single creative craft I've done, it does take resources, time and focus, and I feel like my mind has been too scattered lately. He who is everywhere is nowhere, according to Seneca. I love building Lego, and that's not going anywhere, but I do want to make the building more balanced and more in the background. Maybe I don't have to make another build of this theme, so that it looks good on my Instagram feed. Maybe I don't need to document a lot of the builds in great detail. Some photos could be enough. Maybe it's a good idea to build a bit here and there, instead of obsessively doing 9-hour shifts before an exhibition. I like treating Lego as a hobby, and connecting it to my interest in photos and videos. And I have some deadlines that will keep me active. Some conventions, special uploads, and for YouTube we're doing the Minecraft update video and the Rewind video. I can't say if next year will involve more or less Lego than this year. I'll let these activities decide, and my natural drive to build. Just like the photos we just reviewed, I think that our latest work, the builds and how they're documented, are clearly the best. So focusing on quality over quantity now feels like a viable option. I guess that's what being an A-fool is like, having less wherewithal to create, but the results are better. And sometimes you might want to go back, other times not. I think it's pretty great. What a miracle it is to be able to do this. It's fantastic, and I'm eager for the things I ought to create, and I try to be grateful for the opportunity to be able to do so. So, with those semi-wise words out of the way, I want to thank you for being here with me, and I wish you the best going into 2024. Let's make it count. Peace.